I'm Quinton Higgins. I'm 52 years old. I just happen to be one of 40 survivors of the Carrollton bus crash, the nation's worst drunk driving crash in U.S. history. I'm also a bus driver by trade, which is crazy that I do that after surviving the worst crash in U.S. history on a bus. Married to my high school sweetheart, and I have three daughters. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, who I am.
Um, so getting right into it, can you describe the events leading up to the crash and how it unfolded from your perspective? So the leading up to it until it happened, and
Yeah, this is man, I'm emotional already. May 14th, 1988. The worst bus crash in U.S. history happened to this community. I was a 15-year-old kid. We ended up on the trip simply because my best friend Anthony Marks, he went to a church for a Mother's Day event to give his life to Christ at 15. And, expect that. Uh, he went to this church to give his life to Christ, and he found out at the time that the church took a trip to Kings Island every year. And we recently found out this was the first time they opened up the youth group to invite their friends. So he came back to our trailer park and invited our little crew, and which was five of us. And what we did is back then we cut grass. So this was 2 weeks prior. So we cut grass between five of us for 2 weeks and got up enough money. I don't remember how much, and we divvied it up. We camped out in someone's backyard, one of our friends' backyard, and we walked down to the church because it was 10 minutes from the back of our trailer park. And imagine a nice spring day. You walk to this church, you see all your friends because this was a small town, so we knew everybody, even though we didn't go to the church. So just a day of fun turned into the worst day of our life. So loaded that bus, and my first time going to Kings Island. Loaded that bus, and we left. Went up there, and I had a blast. It was basically, in my head, it was like Disney World, even though I never went. So went up there, and at that time there was a roller coaster called the Beast. So that was like I don't know, that was like the biggest thing around in Kentucky, that roller coaster. So go up there, everyone gravitates to the Beast, hanging around with your friends. Hung out all day, and loaded our bus up at 9:30 at night. Headed back to Radcliffe, and tragedy struck.
so can you give a little bit about how the crash happened?
Yeah, there was a guy. I say it this way: a guy named Larry Mahoney, a 34-year-old factory worker, planning our fate and his fate, and he didn't know it. He was a good guy, factory worker. Got off work and started drinking. As many people do. This is something that's you don't think is going to happen. People drink and drive, especially this was 1988. People do it. So he got off work, started drinking, from what we know, and ended up at some friend's house. People seen him, took his keys, and people gave him back his keys and said, "Larry, go home." Instead, we found out instead of going home, he turned left and ended up at a liquor store and bought more beer. Ends up on I-71 right outside of Louisville. He's already highly intoxicated. Ends up on I-71 around the curve. Somehow turned around, got on the opposite side of the interstate, driving almost 3 miles in the wrong direction. He passed 14 cars, two semis. Missed all of that. This was 10:55 at night, and then we were on our way back here to Radcliffe to meet at the church. And like I said, this church took his trip every year, so they got back at 11:30 most years, maybe 11:45 traffic or whatever. Well, 10:55 at night, Larry Mahoney hit our bus head on, and the bus erupted in flames. And back in those days, those buses didn't have emergency exits, so as you imagine, there were 67 people total on this bus. People always ask, why was so many on the bus? And in my mind as a kid, like even though I'm 52, I'm like a kid in my head. Back in the 80s, it was a field trip. Nothing ever happened to a bus. It's safe. So we were just a bunch of kids having fun on a trip. And when he hit the bus, it erupted in flames. So No emergency exits. So within 10 seconds, the heat came in and started just melting your skin. So if you can put in your head, all these kids in the middle of the night started screaming and crying for their moms and dads because that heat just came in and just started melting their skin. So we all get up in the aisle of the bus, pushing, screaming. Part of we all deal with some type of PTSD. Even to this day, it's not as much, but once a month, I'll have a dream. You can hear those kids screaming for their moms and dads. That's something that, man, it's just a part of us. But we got now. Once the heat hits you, we were pushing, screaming, and I was sitting 6 seats behind the driver. And once I got up, I'm pushing. I couldn't go anywhere, and I actually passed out on the floor. And at 15 to, I can't explain it, but at 15 to feel death in a way like you're going to take your last breath, it's something I can't explain, but I know the feeling. That's something that's still in me. I laid on that floor, and it's kind of true. You always hear people say, you have a flash of your life. I remember, and later on, doctors say the reason I didn't get burned really bad is because somehow I laid on the floor. When I passed out, I did this, and I covered my face, and I laid on the floor of the bus. And I don't remember getting trampled on. I don't remember any of that stuff. But I knew I was going to die. I felt like I was taking my last breath. Seeing a flash of my mom, my dad, my sisters, and blacked out. And the next thing I knew, I was at the back door of the bus. I don't remember how I got off the floor to the back. I don't have a memory like a lot of our survivors. They remember the fighting, the kicking, and the screaming. I don't have that memory. To this day, it kind of bothers me because from year to year, the last several years, some memories come back. And I've never had that traumatic memory come back, but it's like scary because what if it does? So, but my first memory was somehow I was at the back door. And I seen dead kids as my first memory stacked around the door that didn't make it. And I stuck my arm through them. And from what I was told, it was truck drivers helping pull kids off. And I stuck my arm through these kids, and the truck driver pulled me off. And I'm close to one of the last ones to get off. And there was a lady, my first vivid memory, there was a lady, as soon as I hit the ground, she snatched me and pulled me over to the ground, over to the media. And keep in mind, I said, this is one of the reasons why if you see my phone, I keep my phone because we didn't have phones then. So I remember telling her, go get my parents. Go get my parents. I didn't know where we were at. And she's talking to me to keep me awake so I don't go into shock or whatever. And I remember looking in the sky and you just did not imagine the how huge this crash was. You look in the sky and you see the orange glow of the bus on fire. And just at that moment, being in that moment at 15, you're just like, what's going on? You knew there was an accident, but nothing to that magnitude. So I look away, I kind of black in and out, and I hear the ambulance come, all the chaos going around, not knowing what's actually going on, but knowing something's happening. So it's kind of funny, but it's not, because I remember when they got there, the ambulance got there, back in those days, it was like a quick release gurney, and they put me on it, and there was so much chaos, it fell. It dropped to the ground real quick because I remember it had a quick release, foot release. And I guess the guy didn't set it and he was rushing, but it dropped. And I kind of woke up again. And man, I looked to the right and I seen the bus. And you kind of hear the screams. And just trying to figure out what is going on. So after they got it straightened out, I remember getting in the ambulance and they rushed me to Carrollton because this was in Carrollton, Kentucky, right outside of Carrollton. And they rushed me to Carrollton, but Carrollton was only like, I believe, 10 minutes away from the crash. So the hospital was close, the first one. It was full with survivors that wasn't hurt. So at that moment, they realized my arms and hands were severely burned. So they decided to rush me to Louisville to Coast Children's Hospital, which was about an hour away. So they started cutting my clothes off, pouring saline solution over my burns. And I remember thinking at that time, in a crazy way, I remember thinking, I'm messed up because I started to feel the heat on my hands. And I remember I think that's the first time I felt the fear actually, because I'm feeling the pain and then I'm kind of knowing really something has happened to us. So I black out. I wake up with my father staring me in the face, which was difficult to say in a way because part of my story at the time was my father was a active alcoholic and drug addict. And at that time, I was in a broken home. I didn't think my dad loved me, so I could not understand why this man standing over me with tears in his eyes. So he's just staring at me, and I had a tube in my nose, mouth, and throat and couldn't speak. And I look over to the side of the bed, and my mom standing away crying hysterically. And to this day, me and my mom, if you've never suffered a traumatic event, it's kind of you relive conversations every year on anniversaries. And every year, me and my mom kind of go through the same ritual. I was always like, why didn't you come to the side of the bed? And she said, my parents call me Junior. So she said, Junior, they told me you were probably going to die. My lungs were so severely damaged, they said there's a 50-50 chance whether I was going to come out of that. And she said, I didn't want to watch you die. So she just stayed away. So for 2 weeks, I had a tube in my nose, mainly stuck in my throat, down to my lungs, that they would suction us. We breathed in so much nasty, hot mess that they would have to suction us. And every time they took mine out, they had to put it back in because I couldn't breathe. So it was a rough patch for me for almost 2 weeks. And I finally kind of came out of that. And they were told to leave our TVs off. So you can imagine still you're kind of in and out because by that time in the hospital, they're giving you medication. You're hearing echoes of something happened, but no one told us anything. So I remember hearing the TV, but they would turn the TVs off. I remember the day they pulled my tube out, I kind of started healing. TV got left on one day. Back in those, I don't know why I think of it as black and white TV. It just seems so long ago. This was a national crash, heard around the world. And you just couldn't imagine that. And the news was on talking about it. And they started scrolling down the names of the people that got killed. And you can imagine, I already knew at that time this crash was huge, but you can imagine 1, 2, 3, maybe even 10. But as I'm watching this, 15. You see Andy's name, my best friend, my very first best friend, the friend that invited me on the trip. And it ends up at 27. How do you walk that out in your head as a 15-year-old child that already was a broken mess because of my home life? And I remember I started crying and they shut the TV off because it wasn't supposed to be on. They went and got my parents, my mom. And it shut me down for about a week. I had no choice but to go within to myself because I could not talk about it. I couldn't understand it. I could not understand that much death happened around me. Even at that moment, I started struggling with why did I live? My life was horrible. And then I lost Andy. And at that time of my life, I did not get close to people. As much as I speak now, I was a very quiet, shy person. So I didn't get close to anybody. Andy was the first person in my life that I really got close to. So to realize he's gone through this crash, then I'm realizing I'm hurt. So it was just a lot to start trying to process. And to have parents there that prior to this crash, prior to May 14th, they were not engaged in my life, really. So to see them there actually showing care and concern was confusing to me because I didn't understand the magnitude of my injuries. You know, I stayed in the hospital for 6 weeks, and after about 2 weeks, the tube came out. Started healing. Got a little better inside the hospital, but just a very, very traumatic experience to try to walk that out being in the hospital. If it wasn't for, there was a nurse named Judy, 27 years old. If it wasn't for her, I truly believe I would have gave up and probably died. Because this nurse came in my room and she would sit on my bed. She'd cry with me. You know, she laughed with me. She was funny. My mom says, and I asked this lady to marry me every day because I was on morphine. I always tell people that's the only time you get drugs, but she had a smile that lit up the room. And then I was 15. Now, for some reason, I kind of came out of my shell once I healed. It was wild, but I talked more, and I attributed a lot of that to her. But she was I just thought she was a beautiful lady. And so I flirted with her all the time. But I believe she saved my life, and she's still a nurse, and we're actually good friends today. But that was there's almost no words to describe walking through that. And then immediately after starting to heal, hearing all about the kids that died, you know, started having, you know, while you're in the hospital, memories of, oh, okay, you know, I was sitting down and I got up and the heat came in and I'm pushing and screaming and fighting, or having those memories, then wondering where everybody else is at. You know, remembering, man, there were 67 of us on the bus. Where's everyone else at? So you kind of became in your own shell because you're spending your time to heal. You're in the hospital yourself. You're starting to hear echoes of your other friends that are hurt. You know, how bad is everybody else's injuries if my hands are second, third degree burns? And when I realize it now in life, as tragic as it was for me, I was fortunate. I don't have burns like a lot of the survivors. You know, to this day, I have lung issues. You know, I'm dealing with nerve issues now because of my burns in my hands. But I'm pretty fortunate. But just learning to walk that out at that time, I don't know. I can't explain it sometimes. It's just something that's surreal because at 52, I'm still trying to, I don't know. I'll be honest, I struggle with why did I live? You know, I struggle with, even though I believe God's given me a great purpose, I struggle with, you know, why did he choose me to walk this out? So, and that's why I push forward in a lot that I do. But after the crash, after I healed up, so to speak, and I came home, my father went right back to his life. I came home and my dad showed me crack cocaine. And that broke me even more because how do you deal with parents that are already in the midst of horrible dysfunction? I'm dealing with dysfunction. I'm dealing with trying to figure out what just happened to me. And my father starts doing crack. So what that caused me to do, I withdrew. You know, I went within myself. I shoved every bit of pain, memory, hurt, whatever you want to call it, and I ran. And there's no lie. Growing up around here, everyone knew who the Carrollton kids were. We got money behind our crash growing up. So I got into cars and just car stereos and hit the streets. I was angry. Even though I looked okay, no one knew I was a broken shell of a kid. No one knew. I call it a monster because the rage that was in me that I didn't really let out, but it was in me, was horrible. It was painful. I didn't necessarily take it out on people. I hurt a lot of people in that journey, but at the same time, I was that person that would get in my car by myself and try to kill me. I would swerve my Mustang GT hoping it would flip because I'm trying to skid it or something. I'm the same guy that was I would be in that car and drive it in the wintertime when the Mustang's not meant to be driven in the winter, hoping it would flip. I was so angry, I took the same car once and jumped it off of a little 12-foot cliff, uh, hoping I would die. Hoping no one would actually find out that I was hurting from the crash, but hoping to find me and this kid just died because he had an accident. And so I walked around from the age of basically 15 or 33 years old, just hating the world. I hated God. I hated life. Bitter towards my parents. Just a shell of a person. It's taken me a long time to figure me out. Still figuring me out, but it's taken a long time to, I don't know, just to walk this out. It's still something that I don't fully understand. I still deal with a lot of trauma. I deal with mild PTSD, anxiety. But through that, God has somehow given me a purpose that I still don't understand. But all I know now in my life, because I realize now that I survived, I surrendered my life to Christ at 33, and he calls me to heal in ways I didn't even begin to understand. But he gave me a bold, crazy purpose in my heart. So I started standing on courage and healing, and I just started walking that out at the age of 33. And I walked into doors and places and that I didn't realize I'd be at today.
So let's double down on the. You talked about survivor's guilt, and it's an absolutely real thing.
Yes.
Can you explain how you come to understand that you had it, came to cope with it, and then kind of where you are today with like the weight of surviving and how that journey has been?
Survivor's guilt. The first time I ever realized what survivor's guilt was, of course you always have it, but you don't really know what it is until, honestly, you kind of hear other people talk about it. I already felt bad because I had a horrible life. I thought I should have died. A lot of those kids had amazing families. It really wasn't until our 25th year anniversary when our documentary Impact After the Crash came out. Well, it was in the making. But it came out, and one of the parents asked all the kids, because out of 40 survivors, about 22 came in town because they had a private showing for survivors, and then they were going to show it to our community. And man, one of the parents reached out and asked us to go before media hits. Why don't we go to their house and just as a group talk? And I went. It was 8 o'clock when we started, and I didn't want to be there. At that moment when our documentary was being made, I was kind of all over the place. I didn't want to talk to a lot of people, but we were sitting there for about 2 hours, small talk. And about 11 o'clock at night, someone said, "Who suffers survivor's guilt?" And that opened up a conversation till about 4 in the morning. Part of my guilt actually came from that night because I don't have a lot of the memories they had. One young man, I call him a young man because I still see all of us as kids. He had a nightmare for years that he wondered if it was real, where he kicked a little girl in the chest and she fell down. He wondered if he stopped her from getting off the bus. And the young lady he was talking about, she was here. She was in our group. She was at the house. And she spoke up and she said, "You kicked me." And she, in a way, she kind of thanked him, which was weird. Her story is she was 12. She was brought here 4 days before our crash. Her mother didn't want her. She gave her to her father here. Just happened to get invited on our trip. Didn't know anybody. She was in a mix of a mental mess. But she wanted to commit suicide. She actually told him if he hadn't kicked her, she wouldn't fight herself to get off the bus. Someone drug her off. So she actually thanked him because she got drug off. She would have probably died because she wouldn't have fought. His guilt was, he admitted, I had that nightmare for years. So when he said that, all of us chimed in with our own stories of, why are we here? The regret of just realizing, again, so much death. So for me my survivor's guilt truly started, I believe, the week of the crash, because the minute I woke up in the hospital and I was okay, and I realized a lot of them died, I was like, why am I here? My life was horrible before then. What purpose do I have? And now I think this is why, even now, I go so hard in raising my family and just the things I do in our community of who I am. It's just, but you just still deal with it. To this day, I don't know how heaven's going to be, but I'm hoping he's going to let me see those faces. I actually have never shared this. Oh, man. In a way, I kind of wanted to tell them sorry. That, especially the ones in a crazy way that they died and I didn't. I have never shared that. And that's it's not I don't want to say it's a weird thing to say, but I thought of that because there's The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. It's a book. I knew a lot of the kids and they had such good families. Why did this broken mess of a kid with a messed up family get to finish living out his life? And they didn't. So, selfishly, in a way, that's kind of why I gave my life to Christ, because I believe I'd see him again. But I kind of want to tell him sorry in a crazy way. And that, in a nutshell, is survivor's guilt. Because until the day we die, no matter what we do on this earth with our stories or with the rest of our life, that's going to be there. Every year, every anniversary, one of our parents actually just put up a picture of her daughter who would be 46 yesterday. I look at that, I knew she had a good family. Well, in a crazy way, why couldn't I take that place? In a crazy way, yeah, my family, I guess, would be hurt if I would have died at 15. But at the same time, you kind of see it, maybe it's okay, in the scheme of things like that. But so yeah, you go through that every year. The families, the mothers put the pictures up of their kids. So survivor's guilt is just something that's there, that you have to manipulate it to say it's okay. Because the bottom line is this: they're gone and we're here. One of the things that I do tell all of our survivors now is, because we all still deal with it. I mean, it's a conversation that comes up with any survivor that talks. I always tell them, we are allowed to be who we are inside of our trauma. I don't know their purpose. What I try to tell them now is because I've walked that journey out. And they see me do the stuff I do, they believe, a lot of our survivors believe, that they don't have a purpose versus what I'm doing in my life. And that actually, I've never shared that with people, but that actually kind of, I guess, heightens my survivor's guilt, because I have truthfully found a great purpose.
How dare you find peace?
Yes. So when it's kind of like, a lot of them now are walking through life, just still going through life and struggling. I seen one of their posts yesterday, and one of them said on their Facebook, "Can't catch a break. It's just struggling." And a lot of them look to me and follow me on social media, reach out to me. Uh, in a crazy way, that's still my survivor's guilt. But I choose. I have a saying: I choose not to care. Not that I don't care, but I don't struggle. I cannot give people an answer about why I was put on this journey. I can't. What I do know is through my survivor's guilt, I push forward. I push through uh, just everything behind our crash. For instance, our documentary Impact After the Crash. We were talking about a chair that sits at the meeting of chairs. Wasn't until I've watched our documentary 10 times. I use clips of it 100 times when I speak in the public, but it wasn't until 3 or 4 years ago there's a chair sitting at the end of that movie. I think I blocked it on purpose because I didn't want to go that deep in my feelings in doing what I'm doing. I just kind of wanted to do it and get through it, but even though I do it, now every time the end of that documentary pops up, there's a chair. And I started envisioning me standing there at that chair, and one of them that have passed is sitting there. And I've never even shared this. I've got my hand on their head. And I see Andy first. And then every time I do it, you kind of see a different face. And I tell them it's okay. And I'm your voice. Because they can't talk. Even though I see them, they can't talk. And that's just a visual thing that I have in me now when I see that chair. And that, in a way, still digs into survivor's guilt. Because even in that memory, I battle to... I was such a quiet, shy person growing up in my home with the way my parents were and their addictions. And I struggle to push my voice out. But I make sure that voice comes out. For them. I make sure not just for them, but for I know a lot of the moms and dads now. So, survivor's guilt in a nutshell is something you have to push through. I wish it wasn't there. I wish it was something that, I wish we didn't have to think about it. Because when you think about it, you got to think about dying. When I think about it, it puts me back at that 15-year-old boy that laid on that floor with that burning bus that night. And it's a place I don't like to go to, but you can't help it. So I guess it's just something we're always going to struggle with. My prayer for my peace now and what I do is that I don't ever let it point blank stop me. I'm 52 years old now, and I'm just built this way now. Why would I let that, even though I deal with it, why would I let that stop me? Even though that is a hard thing to push through, because as we're all getting older, I see a lot of their social media survivors on social media. A lot of them are dealing with memories that they never dealt with. A lot of us, our kids, we've had families and our kids are leaving home. So we're starting to settle and think about it. It's crazy, but we're thinking about our crash more now versus when we were kids, because we're older and we're slowing down. So in a crazy way, my prayer, even for myself, is that this doesn't hurt us more. I hadn't even thought about that until recently, that this doesn't come around and hurt us more, because we've lost one of our survivors to suicide recently in the last 3-4 months. I'm sorry, 6 months, I believe. And he was only 48. So it's just a lot to continue to walk through.
So you mentioned that you lost close friends in the crash, including your best friend. Um, how has their memory shaped your life and your current mission today?
Oh, Andy. Andy's that kid that we all hope to be because I was quiet at the time. Andy was very charismatic. We all were in middle school. Andy was like the basketball mascot type guy. He talked to everybody. Andy was that kid that made you laugh. And we all wanted to be like Andy. Our group of friends at that time were about 4 or 5 of us. We all considered Andy our best friend because Andy was the center of who we were. And to this day, you wonder what he would be. We talk about how tragic his life, how tragic it was for his family to lose him. He had his mom died shortly after our crash. It was about 10 years later. He had a sister that idolized him, that he was close to. Because of his loss, she got caught up in the wrong crowd and died in a drive-by shooting in Indiana or Indianapolis. But the biggest loss was Andy had a brother that was a local breakdancer and rapper in our time. That's what we did when growing up. His brother was very good. Actually, could have done some amazing things. Andy always wore a hat that said Baby C on it. It stood for Baby Claybrook. That was their last name. Andy wanted to be just like him. Never got that chance. His brother actually shot himself in the head about 20 years ago. He survived and he ended up blind. He's doing a lot better now, but Andy's loss was just huge for not only his family, but to our friend group. You know, Andy was that kid. My dad used to go pick him up, take him fishing with us when we went fishing. But how's it shaped me now, really? Hindsight, I really think him being the kid he was kind of helped me because he was always out there. He was always the one laughing, playing, just doing stuff. I'll say we most of our crew stayed contained in the trailer park that we grew up in. Andy was always out walking around, just doing stuff. Everyone knew him. And I often wonder just who he would be. But not just him. I think about a lot of the kids. I didn't know a lot of the kids personally, but there's another one that I know her mom real well now. Patty Nunnally. She was a 10-year-old that passed away. Her mother is like a second mom to me now because I use Patty's clip out of our film when I speak. But Patty wrote a poem when she was 10 years old. And this is wild to me. You know, if you're going back to survivor's guilt, even in a way. Patty wrote a poem on Tuesday, May 10th of that year. 10 years old. About making right choices. And she won a contest. She was going to speak with high school. She was competed with high school seniors. She wrote a poem called Destiny, Choice, Not Chance. About you may only have one chance to make the right decision. Patty died May 14th by someone that made the wrong decision. How does that happen? How did her mom cope with losing a 10-year-old that wrote a poem like that, and this 10-year-old's gone forever? So when we sit around and wonder what they would be today, I often think of Patty. Her mom's one of my biggest supporters now, the things I do. At the end of our documentary, her mom reads that poem, and her face pops up in a bright light. And what that does to you, that she not only wrote that poem and then she died a few days later because someone made the wrong choice to drink and drive. You have to wonder who they would be today. is something you can't escape. And I believe that's another reason in my life that I always say it this way is that I should have died. People say, well, Quinton, don't say that, but I say I should have died. But because I didn't, I have to go back and wonder about them. So I'd say they shaped me quite a bit. You know, I can't escape their faces. I can't escape their names. But to grow up, especially growing up here in the 80s in our town, there was a young girl, like Amy Wheelock, that grew up in our trailer park. She died in a crash too. She was one of those girls that beat boys up, but she was the one just riding bikes with us. But I remember her just as clear as day, hanging out with us, always hardcore with us, playing with us, and she's gone. What kind of woman would she have been today? It's stuff like that that, you just can't help but wonder. Here I am, 52. I didn't think my life was going to be what it is today. So I often wonder a whole lot, especially about Andy. Would he be a comedian because he was that funny? Would he have went to college? Would his family still be here? It's in a sense that still goes back to in a way survivor's guilt, but everything to this day, in some way, some form, is shaped in who we wish they were if they were here. And, it's one of the reasons I believe I really fight the memory of wishing I would have died in that crash. I hope to live out my life now in the memory of Andy. I wish so bad that as a grown man, that he was here to be my best friend. To this day, I don't get really close to people because I'm afraid they're going to take it. To this day, because at the time that I met Andy, like I said, my household was every week. My dad's drinking, drugging, doing crazy stuff. My parents fighting. So I was just quiet. Andy was able just to bring joy out of you. There will never be anybody like him. And in a selfish way, I don't want there to be because I don't want that feeling of. It's crazy to say, but I don't want the feeling at 52 to even try to have that kind of relationship unless it's with my kids or my wife. I don't do it. There are still always, people say time heals. It's not necessarily true. Time goes on. You do have to choose either push through or stay at a certain spot. But there's always a wall of something there. And in my life, I choose not to really get close to people like that. So I say they shape us a lot in wondering who they were. It's something, honestly, I think about it on a monthly basis. I go to Andy's grave about every couple of months. I try to envision him, what he would look like as a man today. So it's just something that it's always going to be there.
So I apologize for the emotional impact of this.
Oh, you're fine. I didn't think it was going to be this emotional. But
well, this next question, do you think Andy would be proud of you?
Oh, man. Yes. Simply because he knew who I was then. He knew the life I was in. He knew my family. And he was always joyful. To see, I think he would love the fact that we all come away from the trailer park with a life after this. That in a crazy way, and I say it this way, that some of the most broken people are being used and given a purpose outside of our crash. I think he would love the fact that I have my kids and he knew my wife. He introduced me to my wife. Even that aspect of our friendship that he lives through me and her is pretty amazing. I think he'd been that friend that would smack me in my head a few times because I've done some stuff to his friend, which is my wife now, throughout our growing up together. I think he would be that person to cheer me on. So, but yeah, I think Andy would be just really proud of who I am today.
I know the journey of healing has not been super smooth. But how did you manage your emotional scars from the crash, and what is that healing process like for you?
That was I won't say it was. It's still a long process. When I realized I needed to finally heal and take ownership in a way, if I can say it that way, of my emotions and not letting it dominate me, did not come from healing from the crash. It came from, honestly, I really believe this is how God actually works. My wife, uh, she's in my life for a reason. Been with me since she was 14, I was 15. But what happened in my starting my healing was in 2003. My wife got sick with a tumor. The person I was at that time, even though we were together, I didn't know how to love anybody. I've always loved her because she's always been with me. It's just I do love her. Just I've never been that person to just really all out give my whole self to anybody. Well, she ended up with a pituitary tumor in 2002. We walked that out, and it started. She had a lot of health issues. 2003 in September, she had a surgery, and I thought she was going to die. They had just pulled this tumor out of her head, and the night that she come through it, in my heart, yeah, I didn't think she was doing well. I thought she was going to die. And at that time, I hated God, hated people. I was an angry, selfish person. And growing up, especially all my mother's friends, my mom's friends always say, son, God's got a purpose for you. No, he doesn't. There is no purpose on this earth for me. My wife had started kind of going to church a couple months prior to all this. I heard about him that night. I went out on my truck at 2 in the morning. And because I did love her, and I do love her, and she's always been such a good person, she didn't deserve to have death. I believe this is in part where my loud, bold voice came from, because I got in my truck. I'm not your typical Christian. I'm not your typical person that's going to just talk to God. I got in my truck that night of her surgery, and I screamed at him. I said, if you heal my wife, I'll give you my life. And she came home the next day. And to me, that was him. She came home. She was still kind of messed up, had a lot of issues. And I tried to go back to who I wanted to be, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And I picked up a book, Purpose Driven Life, by Rick Warren. And I read it in 2 weeks, and I found a guy in her church I knew, and I poured my heart out to this guy. And something started happening. It wasn't good. My PTSD came out. At that time, I didn't know what PTSD really was. I didn't really know what anxiety was. I had blocked. It's crazy because everyone looks at you like, well, you were fine before. Why are you dealing with this stuff now? I didn't know how. I didn't know why. What I know now is I believe God needed to push me to start healing. So it wasn't too long. I didn't share this with anybody for a few years. It wasn't too long after that I started having what they call night terrors, waking up in cold sweats, having memories of the bus exploding. Uh, and I kept that quiet for a lot of years, but I was healing. And I started slowly walking that out. It took a lot. I was honestly, even though I had come to God, I was kind of angry because I'm like, why are you putting me through this? I ended up, when it came to heads, I don't know, a lot of Thunder over Louisville here is a big event at Louisville, Kentucky. Uh, we went once, and at that moment, I had never told my family I dealt with PTSD as much, or I would always, I was always able to escape. If I was having a memory or I was crying, I was able to escape some kind of way. We went to Thunder over Louisville one day, and I'd been many times before this, and her family, they were under the bridge, and it got dark, and I got antsy. I couldn't stand crowds, and I couldn't figure out why. Uh, so I started walking around. It got dark. I said, I gotta go back. So I went back to them, and they started shooting the cannons off, and the jets started flying, and I remember this loud boom went off, and I started crying like I was two, and I was standing behind everybody, and cannons went off, and I turned around, and I was gonna run. And my daughter, who was like 9 or 10 at the time, she turned around, she seen me. This grown man, it was embarrassing. I'm crying, and she grabbed my wrist. And the rest of my family turned around and looked at me like, what's wrong? I couldn't say anything. And by the grace of God, they had gotten a room downtown. So we walked back to the room, and I went in the bathroom for an hour, trying to one figure out what that was. And then I come out and I told my family what I dealt with. Hardest thing in the world to do. It was embarrassing as a grown man to have all that wrapped up. I made a promise that night to them and to me. I would try my best not to hide it. But I'll be honest, it's gotten, in a sense, not worse, but there's times it's worse. There's certain things that are triggering things that I actually started talking about. Like, might sound crazy to other people, like Thanksgiving. My mother used to have me take turkey out all the time. I can't do that no more. Why? Turkey has aluminum foil over it. When I'm reaching in there, no one's seeing that. When I would reach, I'd turn my head and I'd real quick. Finally, I can't do that because aluminum foil smells like burnt metal. Burning bus. So all those things I started noticing that I had to put a stop to doing stuff like that. Going to Chinese hibachi grills. For years, I was okay because I would block it. No one would see. As soon as he threw the flame, I would jump and I would turn. I had to stop doing that. I had to be prepared now. So everyone's like, well, you went before. I can go now, but I have to be prepared. Starting fire, I can start a fire, but I got to do it. So that night at Thunder over Louisville, I realized I needed to really start getting help. So I started getting people around me. Walked that out for a lot of years by myself, here and there, and finally figured out I couldn't really manage it well by myself. Started talking to my dad more about forgiving him. Started reading a lot. I got into church. Started praying more. Me and God have our own crazy relationship. I'll be truthful. I'm not your typical church Christian. I have a real strong, crazy relationship that bonds me to, honestly, my healing. And I'll say it this way because a lot of people like to talk about Christianity. A lot of people, I love hardcore stuff. If anybody's ever seen the Passion of the Christ, the movie, the beating scene where Jesus gets beat, to realize what he's done for me to be me, I have to go to places like that because I do stuff in my head and I say stuff and I read stuff and I listen to stuff that builds my mindset, that forces me to heal, that forces me to confront instead of hiding. I handle it head on. you will see me cry because you see the emotion now because it's in me. I never, healing is not hiding from it. So this journey of healing is it's something I'm still on. It always will be. What I'm finding now, which is I don't like it, but it's always a different avenue. It's always something new to where I'm like, man, why do I have to go through this? Why I got to deal with this? For instance, I just several year 2018. I don't know if a lot of people know what Celebrate Recovery is. I found myself going to Celebrate Recovery because I started dealing with anxiety real bad. People look at you, well, you've never dealt with that before that bad. Well, it's here now. I can't control, and this is what I get so frustrated with one, people that don't understand trauma, or even people that go through it that really don't want to. I don't want to say don't want to push through it because I get everybody's own journey, but I've learned to confront it so I don't fall. I can't, as bad as the emotion is and the feeling of emotion sometimes, it's worse when you stay in it. You don't know what to do with it. It's 10 times worse. 2018, I'm sure you'll get into this later. I'm a public speaker, but I was doing a lot of speaking. I was doing a lot of stuff. And I wasn't taking care of myself mentally. I just wasn't slowing down. I was just out having memories still. I spiraled. And then a friend reached out. Again, I believe how God works. A friend of mine reached out that was following me on social media. He said, do you ever speak at Celebrate Recovery? I said, I've heard of it, but I've never spoke at one. In a span of 2 months, I spoke at 2 huge Celebrate Recovery events. I'm sitting at home watching my friend Tom, because he was always on social media talking about it. And something said, you need to go to Celebrate Recovery. A lot of people didn't know I was sitting in this house. I was sitting in the basement and breaking down crying. No one knew, not even my wife at the time, knew that I was struggling with suicidal thoughts. No one knew the deep-rooted pain I'd started going through. No one knew that I was questioning why I was still out here doing all these things. No one knew that those thoughts of why did I survive came back. No one knew that. What I'm thankful for is, for a reason, I say it like this, God built a stopping point in me. I've never gotten to the point to where I give up. I've never allowed myself to get to the point to where I'm actually going to commit suicide. Something in me always, like, it's the fight or fight or flight mode. I got up, I need help. I got up, I need help. So I remember we were sitting down one night and I told my wife, she knew about Celebrate Recovery and stuff. So I got to go to Louisville because I went to a group in Louisville. So for 6 months, every Tuesday, I was going to sit in my friend Tom's group of Celebrate Recovery. Not even talking a lot, but really getting a lot of healing. So it's ongoing for me. What I've learned best for me now is when I know I need to sit down, I sit down. When I know I'm hurt, I tell my wife, or I got a good group of friends around me that I talk to. I talk to a lot of men that deal with PTSD. I just make sure I'm okay. But it's healing. It's always new. It sucks because there's always, honestly now, lately, in the last several years, and I can't stand it. Because even me saying I can't stand it, people look at me and know me now. They're like, well, why do you keep doing what you do? And always, just because I'm doing the things I'm doing now doesn't mean I stop, or doesn't mean I don't deal with stuff. I hate it because I'm still dealing with stuff sometimes. But in that process, I continue to heal. In that process, there's days you might see me and I will not talk to people. There's days I drive a school bus for a living. There's days I go to the bus garage in my job My route starts at 6:30 in the morning. I get to the garage at 5, and I tootle around, sit on my bus before I start the route because I'm dealing with stuff. I hate the fact that this has to be an entire life of healing. But what I'm most proud of is sharing with people that you're not just going to heal and it's going to go away. I want people in a way to see all this that pours out of me. I want my kids. I have 3 daughters. One of the things that I say to my girls, especially my oldest daughter who's 31, she's the first one that has seen, because she was 13 or 14 when I really started hitting this journey head on about, her seeing people seeing me cry, people seeing me 4th of July comes around, I can't stand fireworks. She's seen me walk that out. Now she's 31. She thinks a lot of me now. And one day we were joking and she called me her hero. And I said, I don't want to be your hero. And she's like, what do you mean? And I hate to think about this, but in life, they're going to go through stuff. I pray, because part of my PTSD is that all my girls grow up, live good lives, and never go through stuff, especially something like that. That's why I can't stand it when they're out in the world. My oldest daughter lives in Oklahoma right now. She'll call late at night. I'm like, oh my God. My 17-year-old who's been driving a car for 2 years. It's like, oh my God, she's already had 1 accident. It's like, I can't. So all that stuff. My daughter in Louisville, she's had a horrible accident once. So what I tell them through who I am now is that my healing that you see me do is that I know you have to say this. You have to confront this. Again, I pray nothing horrible happens to them. But I know when I'm gone, life's going to hit them. They're going to go through some horrible stuff in this life, maybe. I hope that have they seen how they have watched me walk this out. How they've seen me crying or hurting because I can't stand fireworks or I'm dealing with something. But they see me get up and push forward. They see me go get help. That when they go through stuff, they get up and do the same thing. So this healing that I have to do, and I say I have to because you can choose not to, is it's a tough road. Like I say, I hate it, but you have to. So it's I don't know what's going to come next, and that's the one. I think that's kind of why I say I hate it. You never know from day to day what you're going to go through inside of your trauma. You never know when I'm going to have a memory of the bus blowing up. For instance, to give you a good example, it's not even close to our anniversary of the crash. The Courier-Journal, the newspaper out of Louisville, someone tagged my name in a post, and I looked at it. In the Courier-Journal, for whatever reason, they put up old pictures in their articles from '88 of our bus crash. Now I see it all the time, but I looked at it, and it was their photos and things from '88. I sat there actually 2 nights ago and I read through that stuff for an hour. To go back and see it that way, man, it was so surreal and it was just hurtful. But to go back and they put up a lot of pictures and news articles, and in a few hours on the Courier-Journal's page, it was like 600 people had read it and liked it and went and wrote their memories down of what that night was. Then I reposted it, and then seeing people's comments from that. So it's just something it's going to be with us. You can kind of say it sucks, but it's who we are.
So a lot of people have asked you like what you were thinking whenever you purchased a replica bus. Replica, right?
Yes.
what inspired you to purchase a replica bus from the crash, and how do you use it to uh, educate others?
So, the replica bus that I bought in 2014 was a process of me not knowing I was going to do that because it was not my plan. And again, I'm not a preach person, but for whatever reason, I do know and I believe God designed me. I think because of that cry in me to wonder why I lived. The Bible tells you, God tells you, that people say God knows everything. They say it. Don't know how that operates and how it works, but I truly believe because of the cry in me of really trying to figure out why I survived and all this stuff inside, he reached down and for some reason gave me a crazy purpose. So the journey started actually in 2010 when I lost my job on military base here. Had a good job, delivered mail on the military base. Life was good. And I lost that job in 2008. That time I was a youth leader in a church. I was good with teenagers. I love dealing with kids, especially broken teenagers. Someone asked me to why don't you go drive a school bus? And at that time, I about think I cussed the lady out in church. I mean, because I'm like, why would you ask me to do that? Why would you do that? I mean, that's how it literally came out. I'm like, why would you ask me that? You know me well. Why would you ask me that? And a week later, somebody asked the same question because I was out of work for a year at that point. Tried to get a job. I couldn't find a job nowhere. It caused me out of work, caused a lot of issues in my home life, just life. And I was sitting at home, and my oldest daughter was getting ready to graduate, go to college, and I needed insurance. And something told me to go take a CDL class and try to drive a bus. And I went to the classes, and when I showed up, and at that time, again, I didn't talk. No one knew who I was. Quinton Higgins was basically even non-existent, really. I wasn't a nobody. I just lived life. How God lines you up. I go to the class. A guy named John Marshall was our instructor. John Marshall knew me when I was a little kid. He knew my family well. He knew I was a survivor of the crash. He didn't tell nobody, but he looked at me. He said, son, because he was about 60 in his late 60s, so 70 then when I took it. He said, son, Quinton, he said, why are you here? I said, Mr. Marshall, I don't know. In mind, I wish people could see, have a mirror picture of my life of what outer body experiences. In my head, as he's asking me that, I'm thinking, why am I here? So I said, I don't know, Mr. Marshall. So he just said, come back. So, man, for 2 weeks, I learned about the motor of a bus, and my father's a mechanic, so I'm good with my hands. So I love dealing with motors and stuff. I joke now, they don't tell you about how to deal with kids, but I passed the CDL, and in my head, I was going to cheat because at that moment, a lot of people the school was free. The school would get you your CDL. A lot of people go work for FedEx, drive trucks for FedEx or something. I was going to pull one over on God and say, I'm going to go do that. And, so I got my CDL, I passed, and I did not finish my application. And the safety manager called me. She knew me. She said, Quinton, are you going to finish your application? I said, Cindy, no. And I was honest with her, and I ain't going to lie, I used a PTSD card. Said, Cindy, I said, I recently discovered how my PTSD works. I said, why would you put a Carrollton bus crash survivor on a bus? And she said, Quinton, come in and talk to me. And I went in and I spoke to her, and she said, Quinton, you'd probably be good at this. She said, why don't you at least try it? So I started driving. 3 months later, and again, no one knew who I was. Few people echoed it, but didn't really know. I'm driving a football team on a trip. And I did, again, not thinking, I drove at night. And went to Bardstown, Kentucky, and they come back at night, and praise God, they stopped to eat at the only McDonald's that was in Bardstown. As we were pulling over, I had a panic attack. They stopped. They went in. I called a friend of mine that taught bus safety here. Uh, her name was Angela. I said, "Come get this bus." I said, "I can't get it back." And Angela was a very rough, and I don't want to call her mean, but she was just that forceful little entity that would argue with me. And she was like, "Quinton, you're not coming back. You're going to bring the bus. I'm not coming up there to help you." And that's what she said to me. And we're arguing actually, and I'm like, "Angela, they got like 45 minutes before they come out. I don't know. I'm not driving." And she said, "Quinton, you're going to get on that bus." And long story short, she got me back on the bus. I got him back, and part of the what I went through that night was there's a rumor, so to speak, and it's not a rumor. We actually just found out it was actually what the kids heard. The youth leader of that church that night was standing in the aisleway of our bus that night, Chuck Keita. And people said that when we got hit, he screamed, "I'm coming home." And he must have seen as the fire started, you could see the silhouette of the kids' shadows on the roof of the bus. While I'm driving, I saw that in my head. I didn't want to get on that bus. And I'm questioning why in the world am I driving a bus? So I got back on the bus and I got him back, and I was going to quit the following Monday. I'd already been driving, I think, 4 or 5 months. Bus driving gets in your if you know how the system works, you can't call in immediately because it messes up everybody's schedule. So that was a Friday night. I had planned all weekend in my head to quit. So I got up Monday and I drove my car to where my bus was actually parked. Instead of going to the garage, it was parked at the school. So I'm like, man, I couldn't call in because I don't want to mess up everybody's routes. So I drove that Monday and I kept driving. In that span, one of our survivors, Harold Dennis, reached out to me. Me and him are good friends. He was in my little group that we all went. He told me his vision of making a documentary, Impact After the Crash. He knew I was driving a school bus. So he's telling me this in a span of months, his dreams, his visions of the documentary. Along the way, as he's starting to make it, no one would really get involved. We were all, again, survivor's guilt. He had already put out to all of us that he was going to do this. A lot of them were scared. We didn't know if this was going to be like a gory film. How was he going to tell the story? And so everyone backed away from him. And a handful, about 6 of us, kind of jumped in and started talking. Again, going into how I ended up with a bus, he reached, again, I believe God lined me up to prepare me for what I'm doing now with this bus. He reached out to me. He said, "Quinton, you drive a bus. Can you help us find an old bus?" I said, we call him Bubba. I said, "Bubba," I just drive. I don't know anything about that. So I reached out to my boss. A lot of school bus districts, they have systems you can find license plates and see where buses are. My boss found a bus in Hazard, Kentucky. It was old, and he said it's probably not even in existence. The license plate showed up, it was so old, it's probably not even. So I joked. I called Harold. I said, "Harold," I said, "there's a bus shows up in Hazard," which was like 4 or 5 hours away. I said, "I ain't going to Hazard." And I joked. I said, "Black people don't go to Hazard." I said, "So you can go if you want." So he said, "No, Quinton, it's probably not there." So they put it on social media. The next day, man, I still question God about this stuff because it's wild. He put it on social media. No one said much. I drive 10 minutes to the bus garage to my job every day. Past the same little church every day. Past this little church, there's a bus sitting there one day. Plugged up. So if you know a bus is plugged up, it's an old bus and it must run because they're keeping it running. So I call Harold. He's in Lexington. They're actually getting ready to shoot our crash scene. And I said, "Bubba, there's a bus here." He said, Quinton, we're in the middle of shooting. We don't have time to do all that. Go look at it. I said, Bubba, I said, dude, I drive. My bus is like an airplane, new bus. I'm used to it. God got me through that part. I have not stepped on an old bus since we were in the crash. He said, at least go look at it and see if we could use it. So I go to parking, and this is how scared I was. This is how fear and PTSD works. I park on this side of the parking lot. Bus is over here. I park and I look. I send him a picture. Yes, old bus. It was old 80s. It was an 83 Chevy something. He said, Quinton, that's cool, but we need. I said, Bubba, I'm not getting on it. He said, can you at least call somebody? Pastor Hope. Her name was on that billboard at that church, House of Faith. Called her and I stuttered. Told her who I was. I said, ma'am, long story short, can we use this bus for this documentary? And she said, yeah. She said, my brother is the only one that drives it. He'll come up and show you the bus. So called him. I said, man, they're going to come show the bus. I said, I don't know if I'm going to get on it. So in the meantime, I'm waiting on this guy to show up. I walk up to the door of this bus. I fall to my knees as I get to the steps. I crawl up the steps. I got up enough strength to take a few pictures of just standing in the door. The pastor's brother shows up. He's got like a 6 or 7 year old little boy. And this little boy walks on the bus. He looks at me. He goes, because I was crying like I was 3. He looks at me. He's like, what's wrong with you? I look up, and it was kind of funny because I had my hands on my knees. Like I said, strength was just gone. And I said, boy, if you only knew what I'm dealing with right now. And it popped me out of it. And I kind of laughed because I'm like, man, I'm going through all this stuff. Took pictures of it, sent them him. I said, Bubba, they said we could use it. So he said, Quinton, can you bring that bus to Lexington? I said, Bubba, I'm not driving that bus. My same friend Angela that made me drive, she offered to drive it to Lexington. No one knows that in our film, and again, how God lined me up. I taught bus safety at the time around our county. The kids in our film are kids from our bus safety because we needed extras. So we used kids from here in Hardin County. Well, he wanted those kids. So I said, I'm not driving that bus and I don't want to put them on that bus. So one of my pastor friends had just bought a retired bus from Hardin County. So I drove his bus to Lexington. So we took 2 buses up. I'm the one that found those buses in our film. Skip ahead, our film comes out. Life goes back to normal. I'm sitting on my school bus, driving out of Vine Grove Elementary. I'm sitting there one day and we have like 15 minutes before kids come out. I heard a voice in my head say, go buy a bus. You know how you hear people say they hear God audible? I didn't hear him audible, but man, I heard it. And how I know he's real to me is I heard it in my heart, go buy a bus like you were on 88. And I started talking out loud. Who said that? And at that time, I got cameras on my regular school bus because I drive alternative schools here. I start talking because I know when God's going to do something with me or when he's forcing me or wanting to push me. And I, stupid obedience, listen. And I start talking out loud. And I'm like, do you know what that means? I can't do that. There's survivors here. There's parents here. I'm scared. Go buy a bus like you were on 88. I said, Lord, if you got to show me that one. I said, I can't do that. You got to show me that. So I shut up. I started laughing because I'm thinking they're going to pull my cameras at the garage and see all this. So I got quiet. I didn't even tell my wife for months. One day I'm running my mouth to another bus driver friend I was close to. Her name was Tammy. And Tammy's that kind of girl that is, I love people like her because most people don't talk to her. Tammy's tatted up from head to toe. She looks a little weird, but she's amazing. And I'm one of those people, I just love talking to people. And we were good. We had become good friends, and so and I'm thinking she ain't gonna tell anybody anyway. So, but anyway, I'm sitting there. I'm talking to Tammy, same school one day. I don't even know why it came out of my mouth, but she gets on Craigslist and finds a white bus, and she says, "Quinton, you need this bus." I shut up and got off our bus, and I didn't talk to her for a week and a half. It scared the mess out of me because I knew what was getting ready to happen. I knew it. I get an email from a guy named Terry a week later, week and a half later. Tammy sent this man my information. He says, "Quinton, your friend told me what you're planning on doing." I said, "Sir, I'm not." Emailed him back. I said, "Sir, I'm not planning on doing that." So he goes, "Well, here's my number." And I said, "Sir," I said politely, "I'm not going to do it." So she sent him my number. He calls me. I'm not emotional now because I cannot believe how this has played out in my life. He calls me, and his name is he's Terry, and one of my good friends was a Pastor Terry here. So I grew up with him, so I was so used to talking to a Pastor Terry. He says, "Quinton, I taught classes in '86 of DUI classes. I know your crash well." He goes, "You really going to do this?" I said, "Sir, probably not." He goes, "Well, let me tell you about this bus we have. It's '87 Ford B700. It's the same make and model as we were on in '88. Same make and model. How does it happen?" So he tells me about it. I say, "Sir, that's cool. I can't do that." So we get off the phone. He calls me back a few days later. He says, "Quinton, me and my wife prayed about it, and we're taking the bus off Craigslist." He said, "It's your bus." I said, "Why would you do that?" I mean, I kid you not. I tell everybody, if you don't believe in the presence of how God operates, I don't know what to tell you through this because this is what it was. He said, "We're taking it off. It's your bus." I go back to trying to understand the bus crash and that it happened. I could not comprehend how this conversations were going on. So we get off the phone. My oldest daughter was already in college, her first year. She comes home, and I had just started speaking. I spoke in the middle school, shared my story. And she tells me in the car, she says, "Daddy, you have a gift." I said, "I don't know why I just went and told my story." She said, "Daddy," because I spoke to middle schoolers and elementary kids, and somehow I transitioned. And she picked up that I was good at transitioning. She goes, "You have a way of engaging." So I guess so. So we get in the car, and she was going to actually go to China on a mission trip for her college. So I'm trying to think about her stuff she's doing. And Terry calls me back in my car. And my family didn't know about this at the time. He calls me one last time. He said, "Quinton," he said, "it's not on Craigslist." He said, "Instead of $2,800, we'll give you a bus for $1,800. And I'm starting to cry. I'm like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? I have not agreed to anything." He said, "That's just what we're going to do." So he said, "Come get the bus." And we get off the phone. And my daughter, everyone knows my wife is the one that keeps me grounded. She tells me no a lot. And my daughter goes, "You tell Mom what you're doing?" I said, "Nope." So I said, I hadn't planned on doing it. So it took about a week. And this is, again, crazy in the time frame this happened. Actually, it was like 2 or 3 weeks as my wife's father had passed away. And even in that moment, I'm like, why would I even bring this up at this time? Again, going back to the conversation when I heard in my heart, he told me to do it. The obedience part in me, why would I even talk to my wife about it? She's grieving. Their family's going. I said, why? One day, I told her, and in the midst of her dealing with her family stuff, I said, babe, I said, God put on my heart to buy a bus. I said, she said, go do it. Man, the fear of what was about to transpire. Not only that, the fear of faith, the fear of pushing through, the fear of if you take this step, you can't go back in a sense. So, me, Tammy, the lady that found the bus, her husband, and at the time, my oldest, who's 17, she was like 7 or 8. We go to drive to Lexington, and I meet Terry for the first time face to face. And I bought this bus. And it was old 5-speed. This bus was identical to what we were on. 5-speed, our bus was a 5-speed old bus. I couldn't even drive 5-speed well, but I drove that bus up Bluegrass Parkway, tearing the clutch up about, scared to death, but blocking it and pushing through it. My daughter's on the bus with me. Tammy's following me. We get off Bluegrass Parkway, and I had to put gas in it because it's a gasoline bus. And this was the first time it hit me of what I just did. We were in the gas station, and the clerk was talking to my daughter. She's like, what are you doing with that bus? And my daughter, not knowing me and the kids, said, my daddy was in a bus crash. And the clerk's like, and I'm like, she's not, we wasn't in the crash. And I told her who I was. It's the first time I ever told anybody who I was. And the lady, man, that's when I believe this purpose was birthed, actually, because that lady looked at me. She said, you're a survivor of the Carrollton bus crash. I said, yes, ma'am, I am. She goes, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. And I turned around, I remember, because at the time I was just going on adrenaline, got the bus back, I wasn't even looking at it. And the first when she said it, I turned around and looked at the fuel pump, and this giant bus sitting out there at the fuel pump. And I'm looking like, oh my God, what did I just do? She told me, the lady behind the clerk was like, I remember that day. And she said some stuff that I hadn't thought about in years. And I got on that bus and I drove it back to Vine Grove. And I parked it. And I had put cardboard in the window that said May 14th, 1988. And I parked it and I walked away. It was in the back of Tammy's house, but Tammy had a little field that if you drove through Vine Grove, you could see it sitting back there. But I parked it, didn't know what I was going to do. At that time, within the few weeks prior, there was a huge crash here in Hardin County. A little girl named Breanna Taylor got hit by a drunk driver. The guy had 7 DUIs. 2 weeks later, her brother died. He was 18, and they had a memorial. They lived in the country. They had a memorial at a church or something. He was coming back and hit a deer or something on his ATV, and he died. This family lost both of their kids in the span of 2 weeks. And I call that the ripple effect from a drunk driver. Because if she hadn't died by a drunk driver, they wouldn't have been having this funeral. He might not have died at that time. Again, how God operates. Her uncle, Dean Taylor, owned the Town Bowling Alley at the time. Dean went through bus driving classes with me. He drives a special needs to this day, special needs bus. Dean somehow seen my bus. He didn't know it was mine, but he seen that bus sitting in Vine Grove. You could see the cardboard said May 14th. So he contacted me. He said, Quinton, do you know anything about that bus? I was going to lie. But he said, is that yours? I said, Dean, it's mine. I said, but Dean, no one knows I got it. I don't know. He goes, you heard about Breanna? I said, man, I did. I heard about all that. He goes, well, we're having a huge memorial at Central Hardin High School. Do you mind coming out? Because of who you are and your story. I said, Dean, I don't speak. I said, He goes, well, bring your bus. Dean, that bus has never went anywhere. I don't even know what I'm doing with it. He said, would you just please come and support our family? I said, so I go. I parked the bus in the parking lot of Central Arden High School. And I walked away from it because I didn't want anybody to know who I didn't want to associate. It's got cardboard on May 14th. Maybe it's just parked. I go with a hot dog. I come out and her parents are on my bus. WDRB 41, the news channel, was covering their story. For some reason, they walked out on that bus. I didn't even have anything on it. It just had cardboard in the window. It was an old bus. But of course, everyone knows May 14th, that date. So I walk up and I introduce myself. Dean tells them who I am. And they start thanking me for being who I am. I'm a survivor and I'm just there to support them. It's like, no. Y'all are just now going through this stuff. I'm just here. So WDRB 41 took a picture of that bus and put it on the news. That is the first time that bus ever got shown. And I'm like, it could have been smaller, but it got put on the news. And it was a small news clip that they did on WDRB 41. Basically, the reporter had just said, first they went on their online page. Then when they went online, they came down and did a story on it. And at that time, it was a few weeks after this, I took and put words on it. I was taking and put May 14th, 1988, 27 reasons not to drink and drive. Well, it was at the sign shop here in town, and they came up and did a story as the sign was being put on it. And the realization of how powerful this was starting to become was overwhelming, scary. As they say, walk by faith, not by sight. That was the whole thing. They came down and did a story on that thing. And there was no turning back. And I can tell you, turning back is what I wanted to do. Because I had no clue of what this was going to do. The fear in me of our survivors starting to see it. The fear of me driving this bus and the memories. I didn't have anything in it for several months. And then we had the realization to put the pictures of the kids that died in that crash on the seats that they were sitting in. And you want to talk about something powerful and scary and overwhelming. So we did that. And I was on automatic mode because I didn't want to think about anything. Because it was very traumatic and scary to walk on that bus. This old 80s bus, like we in the 80s, a field trip, day of fun. The bus looked, how we rode when we were kids. But yeah, it's got all these pictures of these kids, these babies that passed away in this crash. A 10-year-old on the seat that said something about her. And he's telling me to drive this bus around and speak. In my heart, I got a little angry at God because I'm like, what about me? You're right. Do you know what this is going to do to me and this all? This is not about me. So after all that transpired and they did that story, I call it bus hopping because I didn't have anywhere to park it. So it stayed parked at Tammy's house in a field for months. You could see it, but nobody really said much about it. Again, I'm sitting around, I'm like hearing the voice, it's got to be parked in public. I'm like, I'm not going to run around here and ask somebody if I can park that bus. It's a big old bus. So driving through town one day, there's a little check cashing place not too far from my house. We had an empty parking lot next to it. I stopped there and I told the girl, I said, is your manager here? And she was very defensive. She was like, well, what do you need him for? Because it was a check cashing place. So I guess they have crazy people come. I don't know. So I said, no, I'm not here for the business. I said, I got a question. I said, it's going to sound weird. I said, I asked her if she knew about the Carrollton bus crash. And she said no. And I told her about it, who I was. She was like, really? You're a survivor of that crash? She looked it up on the internet real quick and got a few YouTube clips. She's crying because she's seeing the story. And She goes, yeah, you can. She goes, but he's not here. He's in another location. She goes, this is what she did. She goes, I don't want him to hear this from you. She goes, let me call him. And she was that impacted by what I shared. And she said, you give me a few days. And I said, okay, I'll leave. She had my number. She calls me. She said, you can put your bus up here. And so I go back and talk to her. I was like, what'd you say to him? She said, I just told him. She said, I wanted him to hear it from me, what it meant for me to hear you. So she said, you can park it. So I took my bus and parked it in this parking lot and stayed there locked up for almost a year. I didn't even go up. I would go start it. I wouldn't even go talk to people about it. Just stay there. You could see it if you're coming through Radcliffe. Well, someone bought the building behind them. And in my heart, I always want to tell God no. I always want to stop. That's my coping mechanism. At first, I'm going to say no. So I'm like, well, I can't park it here, so I might as well stop doing this, put the bus up. So I put it on social media. Does anyone know where I could park my bus? Because by that time, everyone kind of seen it, and no one really was talking to me about it, but everyone knew this was a memorial bus for the Carrollton bus crash. Post went viral. A lot of people said stuff. I actually was at work, so I didn't really check Facebook much. And then when I got home, a friend of mine, Ben Ashlag, managed Colton's restaurant here. Good friend of mine. He said, Quinton, brother, he goes, I haven't even asked my district manager, but come park it in my parking lot. To this day, that bus has been in that parking lot for almost 7 years. When I parked it there, it's very noticeable. But through that journey, people started reaching out. Do you do public speaking? Do you speak? Do you drive the bus? At that time, in the beginning, I went and spoke. I didn't really couldn't drive it. How I actually started stepping out and driving it all over the place. Crazy story is my daughter that went to Georgetown College. She was in her, I believe, sophomore year of college. She was interning under one of her teachers to become, she was interning with a teacher at a middle school to become a social worker for schools. This lady, Miss Apple, one of my good friends to this day, she calls my daughter and she goes, you won't believe this, but your father is Quinton Higgins. And my daughter said, yeah. She goes, how do you know who my father is? She goes, you won't believe this, but I've had your dad's name on my desk for 2 years. She said they do it's called an event called Chances and Consequences. We have speakers come up where they have a meth lab. They give these kids real events to go through. So she goes, we've been looking for speakers for years. She goes, someone gave me your dad's name a couple of years ago. It's just been stuffed under the little thing on my desk. She goes, I was on your Facebook and I seen your dad's picture and his name. She goes, that's your father. She goes, I stalked your dad's Facebook, but I didn't want to reach out to him. She goes, does your dad speak? And my daughter was like, he kind of does, but I don't know if he does that. So when my daughter called me and tells me this story, Miss Apple got in contact with me. So I went up one time and did this. It was called Truth and Consequences. I didn't take the bus up at the time. I did one event, and they pull every 8th grader in this county out and bring them to one school. It ends up being like 800 8th graders. So I did one event, told her about my bus. And she's like, you got to bring the bus here. I'm like, that's almost 2 hour drive to Lexington. I'm not doing that. She said, we got a whole year till the next event. Think about it. Miss Apple's very forceful. She's a very dominant, pushy, loving person. And she's got a year. She goes, do you know what you would do with that bus in our community? Speaking to every year this grows. So a year comes around. The first major event I did with my bus, I drove it. First of all, I drove it 2 hours. That bus at the time was raggedy. It wouldn't do 35 miles an hour. The memories I went through driving that bus in the heat, No one ever goes with me when I drive it. It's me and God and my memories and those pictures. Driving down Bluegrass Parkway the first time, I can't tell you how many times I cried. I can't tell you how many times I yelled out, I'm not doing this, but I'm driving forward. I can't tell you how frustrated I was trying to drive a 5-speed that was jacked up, and the bus wouldn't do 35 miles an hour, or a 2-hour trip took me close to 3. I always kept music in one ear, so I was either listening to mainly praise and worship music, which makes you cry anyway. So just the amount of emotions that I took with me. Got up there at a hotel, couldn't sleep that entire night. Miss Apple, love her to death. She would go with me. She went because I had the bus. I couldn't then drive around, so I couldn't go anywhere. So she's like, Quinton, you need. She knew I loved. That's how I started drinking Starbucks at the time. So she would go get me Starbucks. She'd bring me little donuts, and she goes, we started at 8 o'clock in the morning. The first time I did this with this bus, I drove it, parked it in front of the school. Kentucky State Police were there with their meth lab. They had attorneys. They had addiction homes with people that were in addiction. And they handed out consequences to these kids. And if you got caught drunk driving, you wouldn't see a judge. My bus was a prop. And at that time, we also had our documentary. So the way we set it up that first time, I was in a classroom letting them see a 10-minute clip of our documentary. At the time, I didn't really want to speak on the bus, so we put a state trooper out there. He spoke on the bus. Ended up being like 6, 7, 800 eighth graders that year. Every year I went back. Second year I spoke on the bus, but driving up there and driving back. I got in the habit of doing this. I get on the bus and I started praying over it. But on the way back home, no matter where I go now, the hardest thing I ever have to do is when I'm coming back here, I look in the mirror and I tell them we're going home. I can't tell you the journey I've been on since I've started doing this in 2014. It's the things that happen to me now, the people, the things and the people I talk to. Traveling with this bus now is something that I've become one with it. The first time I had to put it in the shop, and my wife thought I was crazy because I cried because it's like the bus is going in the shop. I'm away from it. I don't know what it's going to do. So this journey and traveling around, I travel all over Kentucky now. To places, I speak to the military base. I speak to schools before prom. I just shared a huge testimony with a lady the other day because she was like, really, I need to know why you do it. And I got pictures of, I don't know if anybody, Morgantown, Kentucky. It's a small, little bitty town here. And a lot of people don't know how many times I really was going to stop. Because going back to PTSD, the things I deal with is very hard. Right after COVID, of course, the bus sat still for a while. I didn't think I was going to go back out much. It's the bus is sitting in the public. People see it. Cool. God, I've done a lot of good stuff. I'm okay if you let me stay at home. I ended up going to Morgantown, Kentucky, and that bus was always running bad. I would just go. Me and my wife traveled up to Morgantown, which is about an hour and a half away, in our car to see where I was going. And you on 65 through Bowling Green. There's hotels on the side of the highway, nice ones. And we get to Morgantown, and this is little bitty town. I was like, I don't want to stay here. And on the way back, we're not talking, and my wife goes, you might want to stay in these nice hotels on 65. This is what I said to her. Because see, behind the scenes, this is about the gospel of what I do. I said, babe, if I stay in this nice area, the testimony won't be as strong. So we come back the next day. I got on my raggedy bus, as I called it, and I drove up 65. And the bus broke down. 5 miles from the exit of Morgantown, Kentucky. I was sharing this with a lady, and I showed her the picture of the bus with the hood up on the side of the highway. I got off the bus and I walked in the middle of the road, crying, fussing, and just, I ain't doing this no more. I called the lady that was going to have me speak. I said, I'll come speak, but the bus is on the road. I'll go share my story, but bus is on the road. I'm done after this. I mean, I was done. It was a hot day. I mean, it was just a lot of memories, just chaos in my head. After I talked to my wife, I prayed and something told me to calm down. And I got on the bus and it started. Would only do 5 miles an hour. It crept off the exit. I got it to a gas station. And this is where everything started coming full circle again. There was a guy in the gas station that read the sign that said May 14th. He comes out, he goes, "How are you affiliated?" "Well, I'm a survivor." He about breaks down crying. And at that time I didn't, because I was so upset about the bus being messed up. So he gets on it and looks at it. And I got the bus started again. I creeped it to the little motel I stayed in. And this place was something. So couldn't sleep. I was dirty. There was only one gas station. So people in the town started coming around because they seen the bus sat in a gravel parking lot by the gas station. The lady at the gas station felt so bad for me because I was dirty, sweating because I was trying to fool with the bus, and they bought my oil for me to put in the bus. She asked me what was wrong, and I was like, "It's messed up, and I got to speak tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to do." And I'm questioning, what am I doing? So they come look at the bus, and this lady, while we're talking, she gets on her phone and calls WBKO out of Bowling Green, news station. And I'm like, at first I was going to yell at her because I'm like, I'm not here for all that. So she goes, "Here, they want to talk to you." So the little girl that answered the phone, that was on the phone, she goes, "Tell me who you are." So I told her. She goes, "Were you on the side of the highway?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She goes, "Can I come up and interview you when you talk to bus drivers for Morgantown tomorrow?" I said, "I guess so." I said, "I don't know how it's going to be because the bus is not really running." I said, "But I'm more than welcome to give you an interview." So by that time, it was evening. I was going to try to sleep. I just couldn't. The people that ran the hotel bought me pizza. And this is how this little town was. I go back to the room. They went in my room, which is unheard of. They go in my room and put pizza in there. Fire station bought me pizza. So I call my wife. I'm like, "Man, it's kind of weird up here." So I ended up actually going to sleep on my bus. The next morning, some lady pulls up to the front of the bus in her car. She said, "Is this your bus?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." Told her who I was. And she goes, "Do you want to speak on the local radio station?" I was like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Me and my husband bought, it's a vintage, like one of them old Elvis type radio stations, all kind of vintage stuff in it. It's pretty cool." She goes, "We bought it and we do live shows, but it's here in Morgantown." I said, "Okay." And she goes, "Well, I'll be back in 3 hours to get you." I'm thinking she ain't coming back. So I go get changed, straighten up, and she comes back, and I end up speaking on a live radio show in this town. So that was cool. I go back to the bus. An hour later, people started pulling up. Somebody giving me $20. "Here, sir, we heard your story. Thank you for what you're doing. You're really a survivor, and you're doing this. Here's something for your journey. Here's something to help you get your bus going." Just people giving me money, gave me a couple $100. I got the bus started and I drove to the compound where I was going to speak to these drivers. The news reporter showed up. It's a 24-year-old little girl. And they had about 30 bus drivers, but they invited all of the school staff. It ended up being like 100 people. So I'm speaking and she's watching. When I got done, she said, she showed me a picture. She said, "I took a picture of your bus when I passed it. I didn't know what it was about, so I took a picture of it." She goes, "And then they called me." She goes, "It was God that got me here." She goes, "I needed to hear you speak." I said, "Okay." Her mentor at a church got killed. She 3 days prior ran her car underneath the semi. She goes, I've never heard anybody speak about faith, hope, and forgiveness and healing the way you have. She goes, how do you do that? So honestly, it's just my faith. I said, this is what I'm called to do. And it's things like that in traveling all over Kentucky. I can't tell you the amount of stories. I'm trying to actually write a book called Journey Before and After the Crash. Journey because I want to tell my full story of how I grew up before the bus crash, and then journey because this is an ongoing journey. I don't know when I'm going to stop this, but journey after the crash. What I do know in my life doing this stuff is every time I turn around, someone asks me to come speak. Those moments that I go, I build myself up to go. It's scary. I still deal a lot getting on that bus. The original bus actually finally quit. It broke down, and I was going to stop again. I will tell anyone that has walked through trauma or any kind. And again, I don't care what people believe in, but for me, I can tell you, when you cry out to God for a purpose inside of your trauma, He won't let you stop if you're doing something for Him and you're doing something out here in this world to better people and to help people. When my bus finally broke down, I was done. Well, I have another bus that someone gave me. It was funny because the people that were working on my bus, they had about 80 buses sitting in the field in Meade County. Old bus sitting on the field, Ford B700. Same make and model, just newer. I'm like, that's cool. And I happened to run my mouth one day. Asked the mechanic who owns it. He said, we don't own it. We just lease this property. He said, but the guy that owns this land is actually out there. So I go out there. His name is Kerry Franklin, big time contractor on Fort Knox. I said, sir, you going to sell this bus? What are y'all doing with it? He said, we're selling all these buses off. $3,800. I'm like, I'm a nonprofit. I don't have any money. So I'm actually here getting my bus fixed. And he looked up. He was actually by my other bus. He goes, well, what is that about? And I told him. He goes, and you're a survivor of that crash. I said, yes, sir, I am. So we parted ways. A week later, I was going to have my bus towed back to Colton's because I was done. We didn't have the money to fix it. He calls me while I'm sitting in that parking lot. He says, Mr. Higgins, he said, are you interested in that bus? I said, sir, I don't have any money. He said, you keep doing what you're doing and my company's going to give you that bus. I'm like, here I go crying again. Why are people doing that? Why have you given me this purpose to stay out here? Why? I've been doing it for so long that the pain is there and it's hard. Thank you for allowing me to have this purpose, but I'm done. I'm tired of rebuilding myself. I'm tired of, that's just how hard it is. But again, our purpose is greater than our fears. So God spoke and said, I'm doing this because it's not about you. A month later, He sent me the title to that bus, Free and Clear. I had a hard time parting ways with my other bus. My vision was 2 buses that He gave me. We didn't have money. And my oldest daughter, who's like a business person, she said, Dad, you're going to do more stuff and you need to start thinking like a business. You got to junk your bus, your first one. Oh, man. I can't tell you how hard that was. To know where I started with that first bus. And then the fear of having another bus of what this might look like. So I ended up taking the bus and junking it and got $1,800 out of it. It was what I paid for it years prior. And all we did was took that money and put a sign on this bus. It says May 14th, 1988, 27 reasons not to drink and drive. And just the pictures. Parked it, The newspaper here found out that I got another bus free and clear. Survivor Quinton Higgins gets another bus, asking me what I'm going to do. And I'm not going to lie, I wanted to park it and stop. Then he spoke to me again, you're starting over. I'm like, Lord, do you know how tiring this is? Do you know I'm starting to deal with new stuff? Do you care what I'm going through? And I don't want to say he said no, but because I know certain stories of the Bible, certain scriptures, kind of how he operates to me, it's not about me. God's biggest purpose in no matter what we go through is to help us heal, but for people to see him through us. What I'm learning now, what a greater way, and if I can say it that way, because I don't want to say it that way, of him to show off who he is through me. Because I can tell you, Quinton Higgins doesn't do this. What I lean on to be out here to talk to people, the double calling now of, I speak in a lot of addiction groups, of my father walking through addiction. I share his story. I share how I grew up with him first, walking into the bus crash. It's kind of the magnitude of having the second bus now is what that has actually become even greater. I don't just share a lot of the bus crash story. I share all the testimonies behind how I got here. I share how many times I wanted to stop. And it's become, I don't know, I can't even explain what it's become because every day is something new with inside of learning to speak and travel. But it's also become something I enjoy and I love as much as you people see the emotion and the hurt and the pain. You have to find there's joy in it. There's a Paul in the Bible, the book of Philippians. I love that book because Paul's in prison. And Paul talks about finding joy in the deepest, darkest places. And when I'm driving around Kentucky in my bus and I'm listening to, it's either hardcore Christian rap, depending on my mood, or praise and worship, and music just blaring in my ear and just thinking and talking and praying and crying a lot. I come out of a darkness that most people can't come back from. I come out of a darkness that these kids never came from. They didn't come back home. But now he's given me the power and the courage and the boldness to walk out of a place that, especially in this generation, especially our teenagers, they go through stuff and they commit suicide. And I'm still here walking out of a 15-year-old broken child. And I tell everyone, especially kids that talk to me about suicide, I say, I've been your age. You haven't made it to 52. So we may have different stories, but I promise you can walk out of whatever you're dealing with. I promise you will make it to 52 if you get help and you listen to someone like me. That's been my greatest joy of learning to go out into our public and speak and share this story. I don't know when I'm going to stop, but it's just become a part of who I am. It's become something I still don't fully understand. I joke a lot and I say when I die, I'm still going to sit at God's feet and me and him going to talk about some of this stuff. Because, again, go back to I drive a school bus for a living. That is insane to me still. Even though I have this nonprofit called Voice for Change that I use a memorial bus from the Carrollton bus crash. I'm doing all this other stuff. The only thing I do know and understand in it, this is why, I don't really push people to faith. I cannot share any of my life now without sharing my faith. And the one thing that gives me joy in a way is knowing that I'm going to go to heaven in the way I believe and that I get to talk to him about this. because his voice is the one that gets constantly, I always say berated, because God kind of chastises us into telling us what to do, but not in a bad way, but for us to help people, for us to heal. The amount of stories I have in me about helping people. I don't do any of this for money. The biggest reward is seeing a kid come up to me that has told me he was cutting. A kid come up and told me he put a shotgun to his head and just got out of the hospital because he tried to kill himself. And until he heard me, he's never going to go back. To a girl that, one of those truth and consequence programs, heard me speak in front of 40 kids sitting on this bus. She's 14. And for whatever reason, I'm not scripted. Whatever comes out of me when I speak comes out, different things. And when I got done, the teacher said, this little girl's going to tell you something so profound, because the teacher knew what she was probably what she was going through. This little girl comes up and she goes, can you pray for me? I'm like, one, you try not to pray at schools and all that stuff, but I'm such a free spirit out here. But the teacher goes, it's fine. But she goes, I was like, why do you need me to pray for you? And she goes, I've never identified with an adult as a child. She said, you shared about you being 15 and walking through that. She goes, I have hated God for a long time. She goes, I need to forgive myself. So I prayed for her, and she walked away. She didn't even tell me what she was going to. And the teacher said, and teacher's bawling, my friend Carrie Apple. She said, and me and her actually, Carrie put our hands on her and we prayed. And the girl walked away, and Carrie looked at me. She's bawling. I'm like, what is wrong? She said, Quinton, you have no idea what you just brought that child from. She said her family had a little brother that passed away. She said her family moved on. They do like special events in the name of the son. She said she has stayed stuck in blaming herself for things, not healing. She said she's just been stuck. She has never talked to anybody about it. She walked straight up to you and asked you to do that. So this has become just a life-changing thing, not for me, but for other people, but also for me. For my kids, for my family, for my wife. Honestly, anyone that meets me and hears my full story is like, my hope is this, that you're not defined by the worst thing in life. No matter what I go through now, I have bad days, but no matter what I go through now, I tell myself I am not defined by my father's drinking, alcohol addiction, the spouse abuse we see in our home, being 15 in the crash at the same time. I'm not defined by all that. What I hope to show people still is that I deal with it. It hurts, it sucks, but I just go.
How does your experience as a survivor influences the way you approach your job and interact with your students?
Every aspect of it, really, because that's a loaded question. Everything in driving the school bus relates to the Carrollton bus crash. Because at first, I would say I go into safety. I have triggers, is what I call them. And first, even bus drivers, a lot of people think I'm crazy because I'm a little too serious sometimes. I can't stand stuff in my aisle. I can't stand people's feet in my aisle. And a lot of kids are like, Mr. Higgins, you're being too serious. And I can't stand when your foot is directly across. And for a long time, it took me about 3-4 years, actually about 5, before I really started explaining to people. Because in my head, I just go there. If I see your foot, move your foot. I need to get up. And if something ever happens, I need to get up and walk straight down the aisle. And then finally, I got to where I started actually telling people why I'm that way. And especially for kids, I don't really talk to, I tell elementary kids a lot, but I don't really be so detailed. But middle school and high school, they don't get it because they just are like that. Well, I started telling them in a humble way because I have a loud voice sometimes. In case something ever happens, I joke first. I was like, I need to get off this bus. So if I got to run this aisle, I ain't tripping over you. But now I'm like, no, seriously. I said, I'll ask who knows my story. And about depending on the kids, 6, 7, 8 of them will raise their hand. They know who I am. So I'll get the entire bus attention sometimes. I'm like, seriously, if you know my story, you'll know that we had stuff in the aisle that night on our bus. I said, so if something happens, if we got to get off through this bus, we don't need to be tripping over your feet. We don't need to be tripping over your book bag. It's going to hinder people from getting off. So I'll tell them, or for instance, I said, I'll give you an example. I said, if someone's passed out, I said, we may have to step over you. So safety first always ties into that. But I have a lot of triggers that I started explaining because these kids don't know where to come from. That's the biggest one. You cannot be in my aisle. Second, do not block my emergency exits. Third, you got to know where these exits are. And then for the most part, distractions. I always get on kids. I listen to conversations. A lot of my drivers, they don't fully understand me, even though they all know about the Carrollton bus crash in some type of way. But I engage my kids, especially the middle school and high schoolers. If I hear you talking about something that can hurt you, I'm going to speak up. If I hear you talking about drugs and alcohol in some type of way, I'm going to speak up. If I hear you talking about drugs, I'm going to speak up. One of the ways I engage, the word snitch. All these, especially this generation, don't be a snitch. Don't tell nobody. And like I said, I get it. Don't be telling on somebody doing something really silly. But this is why we have so many school shootings. Somebody always knows about this stuff, but we're taught not to snitch. So I'll get on a bus and engage kids, or I'll engage a group of students if I'm speaking. First thing I ask, so what do snitches get? First thing they're thinking, why is this 50-year-old man saying that? So they was like, snitches. I'm like, stop saying that. I said, let's flip the switch on you now. So let me tell you why I think that way as a bus driver. Larry Mahoney, the guy that hit our bus that night, we found out 12 people seen this man. I said, now let's use the word snitch, not telling on anybody. Y'all are taught not to engage in getting people's business. I said, 12 people seen him. Someone actually took his keys and gave them back and said, Larry, go home. I said, what if someone would have snitched, been a true friend, and took his keys, called the cops? I said, those babies would have come home. And I always use babies or kids because that's how I see them. And now I say, especially girls. How many of you girls that raise your hand? It's amazing how you'll get the looks. They might not raise their hand, but some of them will be tearing up and some of them will be looking at you. I'll say, how many of you girls have little girlfriends that talk about committing suicide because their little boyfriend broke up with them? I said, go through that drama, stuff like that. I said, they might come to you 10 times. You might not take it serious. What if that 11th time, they actually commit suicide? So who's the last person they spoke to? And that's when they start tearing up because they realize how I'm telling a true story that could actually happen. So I engage that way. Even boys, all these boys now, they fight. They want to pull out a gun or somebody goes to wants to shoot up a school. I promise you, someone always knows that child's going to do that. Just we're taught not to snitch. So I've learned to engage my story into bus driving for every kind of scenario you can think of. I truly love just engaging kids through my story. The most broken kid that's in a home where maybe his father's a drunk or his mom's a drunk or on drugs, or those kids are being abused in any type of way. God's given me a discernment. I don't even have to know your story. I can tell when you're hurt. I can tell when you're broken. I can tell when you're dealing with something as a child, especially a teenager, that you don't tell people. So I've learned to I don't really get in their business unless they talk to me, but I've learned to say good morning. I've learned to say, hey, why are you so quiet today? Because that child doesn't have anybody talking to them about whatever they're dealing with. Doing stuff like that eventually gets them to open up. So bus driving is intertwined into my story on a huge basis. Especially I've had the Hardin County Alternative Route for about 11 years now. I drive the tough kids. Kids get kicked out of school for fighting drugs. But what they are tasked with is they're going through stuff. So I'm that bus driver, and it's a challenge because every day I got to put my mindset in a space to deal with. Some days I ain't got no problems out of them. But just the other day I had to pull my bus over, put the flashers on in the middle of the road and jump up and snap on a kid because they're about to fight. all the anger and stuff's coming from somewhere. My motto with bus drivers, because I'm a driver trainer for Hardin County too now. So I train these drivers. I tell them, I said, you got to learn to love these kids past their pain. You got to learn to lay your authority down as an adult. So every aspect of my job, every day of driving a school bus is just, it's intertwined in the bus crash. I cannot be this bus driver without tying that into it. My kids, a lot of them, especially my alternative school kids, because most of them have been on the bus on and off through high school, most of high school. They might miss a year because they did well in school, but they end up coming back. Unfortunately, a lot of them come back. So a lot of them have been around me. And they'll come back, oh, here you go, Mr. Higgins. I was like, yeah, you're going to get the same story every year because you can do better or whatever. But for the most part, by the time these kids graduate, they thank me. People that don't understand why I drive a bus. Fully don't understand it, but I've been 16 years in now, so I do know I have a story. I do love my job. I know I cannot stay in that front seat and not share my story. I know I can't sit in the front seat of that bus and look at a kid that's had something happen to him and not come at them with compassion. Can't do it. I can't just be an adult that wants to have authority over these kids because they're cussing in my ear or acting stupid. My story as a bus driver, that's why everyone's asking me when I'm going to stop driving. If I become a full-time speaker, I say, I probably won't. So I don't know, but I say I probably won't. It's just, I love my job. And that's hard for people to hear behind being in the Carrollton bus crash. Why would you love being on a bus all day in the heat, summertime, and it's not about that. It's about these kids. I've learned to balance, if you can say it that way, the trauma in me with loving people, which is mainly loving these kids. I've learned to balance that if I'm having because I have bad days on the bus. Like, for instance, this past anniversary, I was wore out. I mean, it was just one of those days where the anniversary was sitting on me. It was just sitting on me. And it was hot. I didn't want to fool with the foolishness of the kids. So I got on the bus and I got to the College View, which is alternative school. And these kids got to ride from E-Town back through Radcliffe. So it's like a 30, 40-minute ride for some of these kids. And 11 of them acting up at the same time. It's like, so I was like, look, dude, y'all know what the day is. It's give me grace like I give y'all grace. And I was telling them, I said, y'all have no idea what I go through out here trying to keep y'all safe. And then y'all are acting stupid. And I really go at them. And so I was like, look, dude, y'all, I don't need to have this today. And the most beautiful thing happened. The roughest girl on my bus. She had been on the bus for a year. Attitude, hated, argued with everybody. Pushed back against everything. One day even yelled out, you must hate me like my dad hates me, so you can share issues. I mean, this constant arguing with me, no matter what. She ended up sitting behind me, just listening. She didn't say much. And that whole week was rough, of the weekend anniversary. She actually was set to graduate the following week, done with school, and getting out, just done with school. And I'll always tell her, you're better than what you are. That day I gave the testimony about the anniversary, she was listening. And she came back the next day and she goes, Mr. Higgins, she goes, I've been around you for a while, but I've never looked up the crash. And she looked it up and she teared up. She didn't say nothing. I teared up because I ain't never seen that girl show any kind of emotion. And she come back, because this was a Friday when she said that. She come back Monday, she got on the bus. She goes, this is my last day on the bus, maybe today or tomorrow. So get rid of that anger, whatever you got to do, get help. So that was that. The next day, she was at her stop. So I picked her up. She goes, I got to go back to school today. So I was like, okay, cool. I said, either way, you done this week? She's like, yes, sir. That afternoon, when I picked the kids up, she gets on the bus and hands me this note, a little square piece of paper. And if you could see this girl, she's very hard. I mean, hard. I call her a white two-pocketed female. She was hard. And she gave me this paper. She said, don't look at it until everybody's off. So okay, I put it by the window, and she got quiet, didn't say nothing. And she's the second to last kid to get off. So once again, I let her off, thinking she's the last day. I said, really, I'm gonna miss you. Do well. I said, I know we've had our differences, but dude, you're better than what you're doing. Do well. And she goes, I know. Went back her little hardcore to me, and she says, I know. We got off the bus, dropped the last kid off, turned around, went back to park the bus garage. Open up this paper. This girl wrote down every name of the kid that died in the bus crash in a little circle and a square and little hearts. In the middle of it, she said, good souls gone too soon. I sat at the garage and cried for 10 minutes to realize I touched that child's life after all those years of her being around me. For her to do this and show that I broke into her heart a little bit, and her to have that compassion, it's going to help her walk through what she's walking through. The bottom of it, she said, Mr. Higgins, I understand you a little more now. That girl has never, ever showed that. The next day, her friend goes to give you that paper. I said, she did. She goes, Mr. Higgins, that day you shared your testimony about the day of the anniversary. She said, he was talking about the crash. I said, I heard her talking about it, but I didn't really hear y'all. I said, I just forever decided to be quiet because I was just having a bad day. She said, went home and looked up every detail she could about that crash. She said that did something to her. So, being a bus driver, inside of who I am, I'm not your typical bus driver. And it's, honestly, as I say in our documentary, it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. That's why I tell people, whatever you have in your life, the trauma, whatever, use it for where you're at. Like I said, I'm 16 years into driving to school, but it's hard to believe I've been driving for 16 years now. I've had the alternative route for 10. The stories, the relationships, that I've built over the years with these kids, the kids that are on my Instagram, that, Instagram has different names, but I know who they are. They follow me and read. Because I always tell my kids that a lot of them ask, I say, if you're a child, I ain't going to really talk to you unless I see you're really struggling. But a lot of my kids are on my Instagram. I got 27-year-old dude, a little Hispanic guy, rode my bus when he was 15 in high school, raised in foster care, went through a lot. I was scrolling through Facebook last month. He was talking about committing suicide. 27 years old, dishing out some of the trauma he's been through in life. Just he's had it. Actually, he was homeless. So I reached out to him. I said, dude, you all right? I said, I'll come get you. So I went and got him, took him to eat, took him to church once, just kind of was around him, him and the little girl he was staying with, and just loved on him a little bit. And within a week, he was like, Mr. Higgins, he goes, he's a real hardcore little dude. He goes, I don't ever post that stuff. He goes, but I decided that night, if no one responded to me, I was going to commit suicide. What if I wasn't this bus driver? So I can't, my story is who I am inside as being a bus driver. I've got, like I said, all these kids reach out to me. There was a meme going around Facebook last month. Who was your favorite bus driver? Some of my most broken kids that are all now in their 20s and close to 30. About 4 or 5 of them tag my name. And I'm like, dude, the way I went at y'all, I'm your favorite bus driver. And man, just to hear them say, yes, sir, Mr. Higgins, I'll never forget the conversations we had. In a sense, going back to a question you asked earlier, would I change the bus crash in a way? It's made me just who I am. It's made me have more compassion to see those kids. So, man, like I say, it's I don't want to use the word fun being who I am as a bus driver, but man, I thoroughly love, I call my bus my sanctuary, actually. In a crazy way, yeah, I get up in the mornings, have my routine, but especially when fall hits and winter and my life slows down, I love getting up, getting ready for the bus, just getting there, having my quiet time. Coming off the weekend, especially Monday. Monday is my day of rest, so to speak. But I love getting up and I go to the garage. I don't really talk to people. I start my bus. I do my pre-trip. And I go sit somewhere. And I'll either read something. I do a thing on Facebook called Prayed Up and Rolling. Even that right there intertwined into starting to drive a bus. The first 2 years I drove a school bus, a lot of people didn't know how scared I was. But I had my daughter. She went to my oldest, or my last one now, 17. She got to ride with me her first couple of years of school. Well, as a Christian, I thought it was cute. Taught her to pray. We're going to pray over Daddy's bus. Thought it was cute. After she got done riding for 2 years, when she stopped riding, within that week, my anxiety kicked up. I was like, where's this coming from? And Holy Spirit hit. He said, well, you taught her to pray, but you ain't actually praying and talking, speaking life over what you're doing. You're not speaking to your fear. I was like, okay, I got it. So for about a month or two, I had a routine. I would touch my seats and pray and all that stuff. And then God said, that's fine, you do that. He goes, but you know how many broken people are out there in the dark? Because I always did it in the morning. It's dark. Like I say, always darkness. It always brings me to bringing people out of darkness. So after my routine of doing that, I would sit down. If I'm listening to music or read something, I wrote on Facebook, Prayed Up and Rolling. And I wrote whatever was on my heart. And I did it for on and off 3 months. People would read it, engage in it. I stopped doing it one summer, or summer hit. And then went back to following, after 2 months of summer break, I didn't do it. Ran into a friend at Walmart. She says, Quinton, how come you're not posting? I said, posting what? I said, I do post. She goes, no, posting your Prayed Up and Rolling. I said, Vaughn, I ain't doing it this year. I'm not doing it. She goes, Quinton, you have no idea what you're doing. I said, okay, Vaughn. And she went to school with us, so she knows me well. She goes, you need to go back to doing it. So it was about 2 weeks later, I started doing that. I tagged her name. And there you go. So for years, every morning, pretty much, I write Prayed Up and Rolling on my Facebook. And the amount of people that engage in that, I don't do that to be somebody. One, I tell everyone, the stuff I write is something I'm dealing with. It comes out of my heart. I'm not doing this to be popular. What I'm confident in now in my life is I know I help people. I know if I'm struggling, I know people are struggling. So that's just something I like doing. So being a bus driver has just gave me a whole different kind of identity inside of actually being a regular bus driver. So I don't like I said, we're on fall break now. Not gonna lie, we do need our breaks because it gets taxing out there. But after about 2 or 3 days of being off, I'm ready to go back to school. Fall, I don't like this time of year because we're in fall break, Thanksgiving's coming up, then Christmas, and then we have all these breaks. I don't really like being off. I thoroughly enjoy being on my bus. So bus driving is just it's another part of who I am. It's not what I do. It's who I am.
So, I mean, I'm sitting here, obviously, listening to your story the last 3 hours and stuff, and it's like, at the beginning you talked about how you don't know why you survived, but I think from a viewer watching the story, I can definitely see why, with everything that you've decided to do with it. It's such a great calling that you're on.
My message to the world would be make the right choices behind any trauma you go through, behind any bitterness you go through, behind any unforgiveness you have in your heart. And of course, not to abuse drugs and alcohol. Don't be defined by who you are in the worst things of your life. There's not just one message I have in being a survivor of the Carrollton bus crash. As you heard in the past couple of hours, it's hit me now as you asked that. You said that was a loaded question too. It's hit me now as you asked that. The many aspects of who I am inside of this crash and the many things I can equate with and share. It's not just about drinking and driving. It's not just about using drugs. It's not just about making right choices. Bottom line, truthfully, it's about everyone has a story in their life. It's about not letting that story define you. It's also about allowing. This is what I truly believe. If people don't want to share their story, I get it because some people can't. I understand that. But I truly believe that if you have such a story in you, whether it's a rape survivor, a PTSD survivor from war, from a story like mine, anything, and you find the path to healing, it is our job to look at the person next to us, left and right, in front of us, in the back of us, whatever, your own kids, your own husband or wife. It is our job, especially once we find that healing, to give it back out to help. At the end of the day, we're born and then we die. What are we doing with these stories in between? I cannot. I can't sit still. I can't sit in this nice house I have and my nice family and love my kids, and I can't have this decent life and then have all this trauma and healing and not give it back out because someone in front of me is hurting. So the final message would just be that. Don't be defined by whatever you've gone through. Don't sit there and decide that pain that someone caused you is going to keep you bound up. As I hear people say, and I get this and I say this in a careful way, learn to forgive, not forget, but some people can't forgive, and I understand that. I can tell you this right now. For Quinton Higgins, for me, because I'm not telling everyone to be like me. That's something I don't do. If I did not choose to find some type of forgiveness for Larry Mahoney, the guy that hit our bus May 14th, 1988, if I didn't choose to forgive and let go of all the bitterness for my mom and my dad, who caused me lots of hurt and pain, if I didn't choose to forgive myself, I wouldn't be able to do all of this with such a humble heart. I wouldn't be able to do this and confidently say, I know I changed lives. I wouldn't be able to do this and speak the way I do. There's no anger that comes out of me. There's no animosity that comes out of me. There's just wanting people to heal through how I speak and what I say. And that's it right there. Do not be defined by that stuff. Our greatest goal, the day we die, whether you're a believer or not, once we're gone, we're gone. What is your legacy? Especially if you have a family. I have 3 daughters, 31, 26, and 17. And I have my wife of over 30 years. At the end of the day, when I'm gone, what will they say? At the end of the day, how important is it that I actually touch someone's life with everything I've shared inside of who I am in my life? When I take my final breath, it'd be different. When I take my final breath, don't know when, but versus I didn't take it at 15, May 14th, 1988. When I finally take that last breath, scripture in the Bible says, well done, good and faithful servant. That's what I want to be known for. Because for whatever reason, this broken kid got a second chance. I hope I've done well, and not only just striving to heal, but striving to help anybody that crosses my path in this. So yeah, don't be defined by anything that you go through. Whether it's, I know this sounds hard, but I don't care what you go through. I say it this way, and like I said, I don't choose to sound hard, but again, whether you're a believer or not, I don't know, but anybody out there, but it's, in a sense, God doesn't care what you go through. He cares what you do with it. On this earth, everyone's going to go through something. Everyone. What are you going to do with it? That is the most important thing I can pass on to anybody that walks this earth. So yeah, don't be defined by it.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Man, thank you. Lord Jesus, that last one was rough, man. You was right.